For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
Okay, beautiful people of the earth. It is JC here from the JC and Shaman Show. Today we will be talking about fake news. And more or less, we're not going to talk about fake news so much as real news when they really actually used to report news. With that in mind, let's go to... Okay, this comes from the New York Times, Monday, March 6th of 1933, I believe. It says, Roosevelt orders 4-day bank holiday, puts embargo on gold, calls Congress. This is the start of America's bankruptcy. There's a lot of evidence to show that America is bankrupt, and we're going to go through some of that stuff today. And just a few things that I could find real quickly on a Google search. I'm sure that Shaman has a lot more documents on this, but the main presentation will actually be something that the History Channel produced. We will be watching clips from the men who built America. The History Channel produced this video, or this series. It's a mini-series that the History Channel produced and aired originally back in the fall of 2012. And they have a lot of interesting truths in this show. So sit back and please enjoy. Watch excerpts of Traits of a Titan, where they openly discuss and talk about buying the presidency, and this was before 1900. These are the same group of people who sat down at Jekyll Island and created the Federal Reserve. And if you bought a president, if you had the ability and the power to buy a president of the United States back in the late 1800s, what do you think you could do today?
But America's most powerful titans believe they answer to no one.
I've heard enough. This is what's going to happen. The Morgan Bank.
And with a presidential election on the horizon, their next move will shock the world. The gap between the rich and the poor is as big as it's ever been. Over 90% of Americans survive on less than $100 per month, while the average worker earns barely $1 a day, well below the poverty line. Working conditions in factories across the country are almost unbearable. In a single year, 1 out of every 11 steel workers will die while on the job. As the country approaches the 1896 presidential election, America's poor are desperate and without hope. One man sees the opportunity to harness their anger, and in the process, propel himself to the White House. William Jennings Bryan. Bryan runs on a ticket promising equality for all, vowing to be a voice for the poor, and to take the fight to the country's elite.
The great combinations of capital have encroached upon the rights of the masses. No man can earn $1 million honestly.
He made himself the spokesman for the common man. He was the great commoner. There's no doubt that he tapped into something that was vital to most Americans that were not well off.
Republicans endeavor to overthrow and discredit all who honestly administer the law, and to allow every wrongdoer to operate unchecked as long as he has enough money.
The monopolies, the trust became a target of Democrats, so that antitrust became a rallying cry of everybody who was, well, not seen as in the hip pocket of the corporations themselves.
I will tear down these trusts. Do you hear me, Carnegie? Do you hear me, Rockefeller?
Bryan's emergence is the biggest threat the Titans have ever faced. He promises to dismantle their companies and to not rest until they're behind bars.
This is William Jennings Bryan at a recent Democrat rally. He's a prohibitionist and a devout Presbyterian. According to him, Darwin's theory of evolution is a pack of lies. He's an enemy of the gold standard and an enemy of big business. It is certain that he will win the Democratic nomination. What do you think?
The Republican Party has a good candidate. No. We have to buy our own president.
The Titans wield more power than any group of men in American history. And they're about to use it.
Much appreciated. This is McKinley's speech that he'll be giving at the Republican convention.
Make sure he sees it in time.
Understood.
Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie each give over $200,000 to McKinley, the equivalent of $20 million today. The campaign is by far the most expensive in American history, and McKinley outspends Bryan by a factor of 5 to 1. But they don't just fund their candidate. The group wields tremendous influence, and they aren't shy about using it. Suggesting headlines and orchestrating PR campaigns aimed at getting McKinley elected, the nation's leading industrialists turn to fear tactics.
Many big employers, many big industrialists said, if Bryan wins the election, business is going to be so bad, we're simply closing shop. So if Bryan wins on election Tuesday, don't bother showing up for work on the next day because there won't be jobs. Well, if you're a worker and this is something that confronts you, you're going to think very seriously, even if you had been intending to vote for Bryan. Which way does, maybe your heart leans toward Bryan, but where does your pocketbook point?
On election day, the lines are drawn. It's Wall Street versus Main Street, rich versus poor.
One of the things of an evolving society is the wealth distribution. And it's clear that what we argue about today, that's the core of every politics, is it better with wealth in the hands of a few versus distributing among the many, whether from a moral or an economic point of view.
90% of eligible voters go to the polls, roughly double recent turnouts.
In the 1890s, voting was a public act. And on one side, there was the Republican ballot box, and the other side was the Democratic ballot box. And so your foreman, or an agent of your foreman, could see who you voted for. So there was a certain coercion that was employed by the Republicans upon those urban workers. They might well have decided what they decided on their own, but this simply made it easier for them to decide that.
Until finally, a president is chosen. Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan have dodged a bullet. the country remains in their control. With McKinley in office, they're free to conduct business in the way they've become accustomed.
Now we're going to watch an excerpt from Rich to Richer. The people who own America flat out tell you that the President of the United States is just an honorary title. It really doesn't mean anything.
The United States versus Standard Oil. This hearing is now in session. Please state your name.
John Rockefeller.
Mr. Rockefeller, can you tell the court how in just 1 year in 1872 you acquired all the refineries in Cleveland?
I don't remember. It was 36 years ago.
You used intimidation to wipe out the competition, did you not? I mean, so ruthlessly that it became known as the Cleveland Massacre?
I don't remember any massacre.
Are you aware of payments made by Standard Oil to a senator, $15,000 to block a bill hostile to Standard Oil?
I don't remember.
We have a list of bribes made by Standard Oil to politicians between 1903...
I stepped down as chief executive of Standard Oil in 1902. I can't answer for any incidents that occurred after that date.
You are still president of Standard Oil, are you not?
It's an honorary title, much like that of President of the United States.
And in this series, guess who makes a special appearance? Donald Trump.
Negotiating is a real art. It's an art. And a great negotiator is like a great surgeon, and they're very, very rare. You don't see it often.
Many are convinced that America's largest companies are holding the country back. The age of monopoly is under threat.
I hate monopolists. I fought monopolists all my life. I always wanted an even playing field, but I had to fight for an even playing field for myself.
This man is against monopolies, yet he says that he has fought him his entire life, and now he seems to be a monopolist. And they try and convince you that monopolies don't exist anymore. Think, people. Think. Start using your mind. Start using your brain. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
And then you came to America and became a king of industry. You created your own destiny.
Destiny is not a matter of chance, it is a matter of choice.
Exactly. Quote from Shakespeare.
No. William Jennings Bryan said it. And we three kings of industry have robbed him of his destiny.
Yeah, for the greater good, to create more wealth.
Only if that wealth is used for the benefit of mankind.
What is the proper relationship, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
For all of you people who believe that the creation of the Federal Reserve was just some sort of a conspiracy theory, which I'm probably sure that not many people believe that on this channel, but just for the sake of being able to share this with your family members, and if they call you crazy, you can say, well, look at this video. So here is the Jekyll Island Club Resort, and as you can see, the Aldrich Room, and this was named for Nelson Aldrich, one of the original members of the Jekyll Island Club. The Aldrich Room features wood pocket floors and may be combined with the Federal Reserve Room. Isn't that interesting? So down here at the Federal Reserve Room, it was in this very room that in 1910 a group of businessmen met to solve the economic crisis of the nation. Together they created the first draft of what would become the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Reserve Bank. You have the Morgan Center over here, the Pulitzer Room, named for Joseph Pulitzer, who was a publisher of the New York World and the St. Louis Dispatch. So this is where they get and acquire their media to change the mind of everyday people. And then down here you have the Astor Room, obviously named after John Jacob Astor, who was vehemently opposed to the Federal Reserve System. So here, with Reuters World Business, Market, and Politics Media, we can see an article that they wrote up about the 2008 bailout. Down here we can see, in its early days, Citi was a politically connected bank with poor lending practices, controlled by a management team with alcohol problems. The bank came close to failure in the panic of 1837, but it was bailed out by John Jacob Astor. So Astor had a huge stake in Citibank. For the next 72 years, Citi was capably run and grew to be the nation's largest bank, taking on deposits and panics because of its perceived solidity. Frank Vanderlip, the originator of many of Citi's long-term problems, tops the list. Like several of his successors, Vanderlip was not professionally a banker. He was a journalist and U.S. Treasury official. He focused his tenure by doing much to create the half-baked Federal Reserve System rather than a single central bank, which would have decimated Citi's correspondent banking businesses. So this would have been really, really bad for John Jacob Astor. But it turned out being okay for the group of businessmen who created the Federal Reserve, because unfortunately John Jacob Astor died on April 15th, 1912 in the Atlantic Ocean. He went down with the Titanic. And that was the end of John Jacob Astor, or his resistance to the Federal Reserve banking structure. So these days with the internet, it should not be hard to find out and figure out that the Federal Reserve was created by bankers at Jekyll Island, Georgia in 1910. And Nelson Aldrich is the one who was on the Senate floor that pushed the bill through the House and the Senate. He's the one who introduced it. It was originally called the Aldrich Bill, but that didn't go over with people so well, so they renamed it the Federal Reserve. So the general public would believe that it was ran by the government and not by private bankers. So about 20 years after the business tycoons established the Federal Reserve in 1913, and after Black Monday in 1929, in 1933, America was dissolved and went bankrupt. And this is a congressional record from March 17, 1993, volume 33, page H-1303. Republican James Traficant Jr. from Ohio is addressing Congress, and he says, It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act, March 9, 1933, 48 Stat 1 Public Law 89-719, declared by President Roosevelt being bankrupt and insolvent. HJR 192, 73rd Congressional M Session, June 5, 1933, joint resolution to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, dissolve the sovereign authority of the United States and the official capacities of all United States governmental offices, officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States federal government exists today in name only. If we come down here, it says Federal Reserve notes, FRNs, are unassigned checks written on a closed account. FRNs are an inflatable paper system designed to create debt through inflation, devaluation of currency. Whenever there is an increase of the money supply of a money substitute in the economy without a corresponding increase in the gold and silver backing, inflation occurs. Inflation is an invisible form of taxation that irresponsible governments inflict on their citizens. The Federal Reserve Bank, who controls the money supply and movement of FRNs, has everybody fooled. They have access to an unlimited supply of FRNs, paying only for the printing cost of what they need. FRNs are nothing more than promissory notes for the U.S. Treasury securities, T-bills, a promise to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve Bank. There is a fundamental difference between paying and discharging a debt. To pay a debt, you must pay with value or substance, i.e. gold, silver, barter, or a commodity. With no backing in value or substance, no contract in common law is valid unless it involves an exchange of goods and valuable consideration. Unpayable debt transfers power and control to the sovereign power structure that has no interest in money, law, equity, or justice because they have so much wealth already. Their lust is for power and control. Since the inception of central banking, they have controlled the fates of nations. And here is the document that comes from, the Congressional Senate Commission document that statement comes from. Congressional Record of the House, H 1303. Here's a document issued March 9, 1933 by the President of the United States, a proclamation. Whereas on March 6, 1933, I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, by proclamation declared the existence of a national emergency and proclaimed a bank holiday extending from Monday, the 6th day of March, to Thursday, the 9th day of March, 1933, both dates inclusive, in order to prevent the export, hoarding, or earmarking of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency, or speculation in foreign exchange. And whereas under the Act of March 9, 1933, all proclamations heretofore or hereafter issued by the President pursuant to the authority conferred by Section 5B of the Act of October 6, 1917, as amended, are approved and confirmed. And that Act of October 6, 1917 is the Trading with the Enemy Act. Whereas said national emergency still continues and it is necessary to take further measures extending beyond March 9, 1933 in order to accomplish such purposes. Now, therefore, I, Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States of America, in view of such continuing national emergency, by virtue of the authority vested in me by Section 5B of Act of October 6, 6, 1917, 40 Stat L 411, as amended by the Act of March 9, 1933, do hereby proclaim, order, direct, and declare that all the terms and provisions of said proclamation of March 6, 1933, and the regulations and orders issued thereunder are hereby continued in full force in effect until further proclamation by the President. In witness thereof, and you come down here, and there's Franklin Delano Roosevelt's signature. Here is an executive order where on or before May 1 of 1933, all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates now owned by them to a Federal Reserve Bank, branch, or agency, or to any member bank of the Federal Reserve System. And so this was an executive order telling all of the private persons in America to deliver gold or their bullion certificates to the Federal Reserve System, to the Federal Reserve Bank. And back then, people actually believed that the bank was a national bank and not a private bank. And today, we know that it's a private bank. We all saw Alan Greenspan on TV saying that the President of the United States has absolutely no control over the Federal Reserve or what they do or what their policies are. Now that we've seen that not only did the banking elite purchase the presidency in the late 1800s, they openly talk about it and admit it on the History Channel, and in a lot of ways brag about it. Within 20 years of purchasing that presidency, they established the Federal Reserve Bank, and within 20 years of establishing the Federal Reserve Bank, they caused America to go bankrupt, and they bought it. After they caused America to go bankrupt and they bought it, and after World War II, America took over the world as a superpower because America was the only country that had any type of industrialization left. They're the only country that could produce anything in the world because every other country had been bombed, their factories were destroyed. And that's what spurred the economic growth and prosperity of America. Now, it should be very clear to everybody who's watching this that the banks have owned America for your entire lifetime. Hopefully, people will stand together and do something about this because they have no power if we don't give it to them. It says so in their own documents. Thank you for watching this. I am Just Conspiracy, and I just wish to conspire with other good people of this planet to leave a better world for future generations than the world we all grew up in. Thank you.